I'm Lauren Kruse, a graduate student at Morningside University and a Strat 2 teacher at Hartford Upper Elementary School. The title of my research project is Investigation on the Impact of the Pull-Out Instructional Model for 5th grade students receiving special education services in their reading achievement. The problem statement addressed in this research project is despite legislation's efforts to increase the amount of time students receiving special education services spend receiving their instruction alongside their grade level peers, the laws put in place have not helped to increase students receiving special education services reading achievement. So special education students are not where they're expected to be in terms of reading. The impact of this problem is special education students often experience higher levels of grade level retention and high school dropout rates, which can lead to further problems for them down the road where they're unable to find a successful career. While in school, they have fewer instructional opportunities, and it also impacts the teachers, where general education teachers feel underprepared to teach the special education students within their classroom, and there's poor teacher retention rates among special education teachers as they don't feel their jobs are highly valued and they're not able to teach how they were certified, so they're unable to pull out their special education students to provide that small group instruction and individualized lessons. Past research has been done on the best way to provide instruction to special education services, and some of the interventions that have been tried are fully segregated school instruction. So the special education students were taught in a completely different school setting. They weren't even in the same building as their general education peers. Segregated special education classrooms. So this is where the special education students were taught in the same school building as their general education peers, but oftentimes they were pulled to a separate classroom. Integrated special education classes was where students receiving special education services received instruction in both their general education classroom as well as a special education classroom. So they were kind of getting the best of both worlds during this time. Another intervention that was researched was the regular classroom with resource support. So this is where students receiving special education services would stay in their general education classroom and learn by interacting with their grade level peers by their general education teacher, and the special education teacher would push into that classroom to provide additional support. My proposed intervention is the pull-out instructional model method. So students receiving special education services spend time in their general education classroom, but they're also pulled out to go to the special education classroom to be provided individualized instruction, which aligns with Siegfried Engelmann's direct instruction model theory. He states that students receiving special education services need more teaching in less time in a small group setting with frequent teacher interactions and carefully designed lessons. When looking at the purpose of this study, the research question I was trying to answer was, do 5th grade students who qualify to receive special education services achieve more in reading when they are provided instruction using the pull-out instructional model method versus the regular push-in instructional model method measured by the FastBridge A reading assessment? So the variables for this study were the independent variable, the pull-out instructional model method approach to teaching the special education students when it came to reading, and the dependent variable was the students' growth according to the FastBridge A reading assessment. The hypothesis for this research study was 5th grade students who qualify to receive special education services score higher on the FastBridge A reading assessment when they receive their instruction through the pull-out instructional model method than when they receive their instruction through the regular push-in instructional model method. This was a one-group study, so the same participants were used for the baseline phase as well as the treatment phase. The baseline phase took place the first semester of the school year, where students received the regular push-in instructional model method, and the treatment phase took place the second semester of the school year, where the students received the pull-out instructional model method. They were assessed 3 times a year using FastBridge A reading assessment. They were assessed in the fall, winter, and spring, and their scores were compared fall to winter compared to winter to spring growth. Participants used for this study were 7 fifth grade students who qualified to receive special education services in reading, and they all came from the same general education classroom. 4 males and 3 females. 6 were Caucasian or white, 1 was biracial. All 7 came from low SES families and were on free and reduced lunches, and all 7 had IEPs. The materials used for this research project was the FastBridge A reading assessment that consisted of benchmark, scores and norms documents, administration and scoring instructions, an assessment report, and a scoring guide. Fontes and Pinnell's Leveled Literacy Intervention Curriculum, which is referred to as LLI, was used during the treatment phase when students were receiving the pull-out instructional model method, and that consisted of a teacher's guide, scripted lessons, writer's notebooks, leveled readers, small dry erase boards, and whiteboard markers for students to engage in the lessons. The teacher and researcher used the Dell laptop and Microsoft Office Excel for data collection and analyzation, and the students took the FastBridge A reading assessment on their school-issued Google Chromebooks and wore Soundnetic headphones since the assessment was fully computer automated. The FastBridge A reading assessment followed the same procedure in the fall, winter, and spring when it was given to students. So the instructions were given orally by the testing administrator. Then the instructions were given automated through the FastBridge website. Students would take the assessment on their Chromebooks. When they were finished, they would raise their hand so the testing administrator could help them close out of the assessment successfully, and then students waited quietly for everyone to finish. As soon as all the students were finished, the testing administrator and teacher could gather the scores right off of the FastBridge website to record and begin analyzing. The second semester of the school year, during the treatment phase of the research project where the students were receiving the pull-out instructional model method, Fontes and Pinnell's Leveled Literacy Intervention was used, and that followed the same procedure every day. So students, 45 minutes a day, 5 days a week, were pulled from their general education classroom into the special education classroom with the special education teacher, and they went through the LLI lesson. An LLI lesson starts with a repeated read of a familiar text. Then there's a word work lesson to introduce a new vocabulary skill. Book introduction for the new book that's going to be read that day. Then the students would read the new book with the teacher, and the teacher had selected teaching points for each student, so they would confer in with each student to address individualized needs. Following the reading was a comprehension conversation, answering questions in, about, and beyond the text. And then after the comprehension conversation, students would engage in writing about reading. So a teacher would give a prompt, students would write about what they read that day. And this procedure was the same every day, 5 days a week, when the students were pulled out. A paired samples t-test was ran, and an alpha level of 0.05 was used to show that statistically significant evidence that the pull-out instructional model method impacted fifth grade students who qualified to receive special education services reading growth according to the FastBridge A reading assessment. If you look down here, the t equaled negative 3.021, and there was a p-value of 0.023. So when you're looking at an alpha level of 0.05, it was statistically significant. In addition to the T and P values, if you look at the descriptive statistics, from fall to winter growth scores, the mean was 1.714 with a standard deviation of 3.546. And from winter to spring, the mean score was 8.429 with a standard deviation of 3.690. Looking at table 1, you can once again see the mean scores from fall to winter growth on FastBridge A reading assessment and the winter to spring growth on FastBridge A reading assessment. Looking at table 2 here, you can see that mean difference is very significant, 6.716, but the most important thing to look at is that p-value of 0.023 to show that the impact of the pull-out instructional model method was supported, and there was statistically significant evidence to support that. When you look back to past research and theory, this research project aligns the most with segregated special education classes and Engelmann's direct instructional model theory. With the pull-out instructional model method, students technically are segregated from their general education classroom as they're pulled to the special education classroom, but it is important to keep in mind it's only for 45 minutes a day. Engelmann's direct instructional model theory addresses that special education students need that small group instruction with frequent teacher feedback through carefully designed lessons that provide a lot of opportunities for repeated practice. And looking at Fontes and Pinnell's LLI curriculum that's utilized during that pull-out instructional model method, all the components associated with LLI address those key components Engelmann addresses in his instructional model theory that help special education students be successful. When it comes to implementing the pull-out instructional model method, teachers, parents, and students are all impacted one way or another. Teachers are able to teach now more what they're certified in, so the general education teacher can focus on the general education students as a whole, where the special education teacher feels valued and can really teach those individualized skills to special education students. It creates more collaboration with colleagues among teachers as they're sharing students, and teachers are also pushed to learn and implement a new curriculum. So the special education teacher for this research project learned how to use Fontes and Pinnell's LLI curriculum. Parents have to come to terms though and accept that their child will be spending more time out of the general education classroom, communicate with more than one teacher, and become knowledgeable about what their child is learning in both classrooms. Students are receiving that individualized small group instruction to help them be successful. They do have to form relationships and work with more than one teacher though, and also learn more than one set of classroom routines and expectations when the pull-out instructional model method is being utilized. Limitations to this study was the small sample size. Only 7 participants were used, and they all came from the same general education classroom. The timing of this research study was not ideal, as students were just coming off the COVID-19 closure, so when they came back in August, they'd had an extended summer vacation, which definitely could have impacted the scores in August. And the natural student growth progression, it's expected for students to grow throughout the school year, so the scores might not, the increase in the score from the winter to spring could have had more to do with natural growth and progression versus the pull-out instructional model method. And also the data collection process just used a single assessment to gather data, so that one test, students might not have felt comfortable using the computer program or taking the FastBridge A-reading assessment. It could have fallen on a bad day, so just looking at one single assessment could be a limitation to the data collected. Suggestions for future research would be to use a larger sample size, explore using all the special education students across the grade level versus just one classroom. Investigate across more subject areas than just reading to see if the pull-out instructional model method was impactful in math or writing or different subject areas. Assess in multiple ways to gather data. So instead of just using the FastBridge A-reading assessment in the fall, winter, and spring, assess students in multiple ways so they have multiple opportunities to express what they know, and have the assessments be ongoing throughout the semester to see the growth or see if students are able to display what they know better in a different way. And lastly, expand the study over a longer period of time. So see if the summer regression occurred after the pull-out instructional model method was used during the previous school year. So for example, with this research study, I would follow the students next year and see what their fall scores are in comparison to what they were this last year. Lastly, here are my slides of references.